It's 4 o'clock or
Yeah, he was
4:01, and this is the Metropolitan Council meeting on June 14th, 2023. I'll call the meeting to order. I'm Charlie Zelli, Chair, and there is a brief business agenda, but we had two interesting information items on today's agenda, and unless there's objection, I will assume the agenda is approved. Which brings us to approval of the council meeting from our meeting on May 24th. Is there a motion and a second to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, thank you. Any additions, subtractions, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. At this point in the agenda, we have an opportunity for members of the public who have pre-registered to address the council for a 3-minute presentation. I think we have Pastor Elijah McDavid who wants to address the council. So, Pastor, welcome. We have 3 minutes, and we look forward to hearing you.
No matter where I stand.
Wherever you like. That's good.
Well, good afternoon, members of the council and Chairman Zelli. Thank you for the time and for the opportunity to be here. I'm Reverend Elijah McDavid III. I serve as senior pastor of the Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in North Minneapolis, and our 800-member congregation represents individuals from across the 7-county metro. We come from a variety of neighborhoods, but we are all united by a shared belief in the dignity of all human beings, and we believe that that dignity affords everyone the right to a safe, stable, and affordable home. Next year in North Minneapolis, we are excited to welcome Emerson Village, which will provide desperately needed apartments for families, primarily African-American families who are being displaced by rising housing costs. Our congregation is keenly aware of the potential effects of the Upper Harbor Terminal project and how that will affect displacement. So we're grateful for the much-needed addition of Emerson Village, but we know that it's not only Minneapolis where deeply affordable homes are needed, and it's not the only community where Black and brown families are excluded from housing opportunities. So we believe that affordable housing belongs in all communities, and moreover, we believe it benefits all of us when we live together in diverse community, because our faith values remind us that diversity is a gift. For far too long, the American story has been tainted by desires for homogeneity, but we've lived long enough in history to know that keeping racial groups and income levels separate doesn't ultimately benefit anyone. There's a blessing in living near and learning from all of our neighbors, and ensuring access to affordable homes throughout the region addresses our current moral crisis, and it creates residual benefits for generations to come. So we want to be clear today that we believe it's a crisis, that there are not enough deeply affordable homes available for people who live at or below the 30% area median income in the suburbs. And over the last 10 years, we've noted that only 228 new units affordable at 30% of the area median income or below have been constructed. We want to thank this council for setting the goal to create 1,900 new units annually, but we want to make sure that we're working together to get there and to utilize more project-based vouchers far more consistently. And so that's why we're here today. Of course, we're grateful that you had an RFP for project-based vouchers this year and recently awarded 10 to Gladstone Crossing, the Beacon development in Maplewood. But we're calling for the Met Council to unlock the metro by creating clear policy across the board to use these project-based vouchers connected to development goals and to award them across the metro, and especially to work with smaller housing authority and jurisdictions. Behind me are representatives from Beacon who have collected keys from faith communities and members who could not be here today, all of them who witnessed together the need for deeply affordable housing. And so these keys represent the 1,900 affordable homes that need to be built every year. And we thank you for the opportunity and the consideration of unlocking these homes and creating more avenues for safe and for healthy living. We know that there are many objections and policy reasons that make this difficult, and we have heard that this is a serious problem, but we believe that it's not just Beacon who cares about this, but that there are more others who will be affected and improved. And so we ask that you would consider this policy on this year to take project-based vouchers to the next level, to award them across the metro for the sake of our human dignity and for communal diversity. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the consent agenda, which was sent in advance. Any questions or discussion on consent items?
Mr. Chair, just a point of personal privilege.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate everybody coming tonight. It's not easy to sometimes get here at this time of day, and you have to have transportation to get here, however you got here, but it kind of reminds me of being back on a city council, because regularly our chambers would be full. So we don't always get it, but everybody who does show up is very much appreciated, and we take your comments to heart. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second and is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
Approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, there are reports from the Community Development on the consent agenda. No reports from the Environment Committee. No reports from the Management Committee. There is from the Transportation Committee. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-121, same week as for the purchase of 5 electric buses and 5 chargers for Gold Line Bus Rapid Transit Project. Metro Gold Line BRT is a 10-mile transitway project in Ramsey and Washington counties in the eastern Twin Cities metropolitan area. Council executed full funding grant agreement with the FTA on April 4th, 2023. The Gold Line BRT will be a combination of 5 electric and 12 diesel buses. New Flyer of America is the only Buy America compliant 60-foot bus manufacturer. The adopted zero-emissions bus transition plan guiding principles include technical viability, equity, and environmental justice and fiscal impact. The 5 electric buses and chargers for Gold Line are identified in the transition plan. Buses and chargers will be purchased utilizing the Washington State Cooperative Purchasing Agreement, which provides numerous benefits, including shortened procurement times and reduced staff time. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to exercise and purchase bus options utilizing the State of Washington's Master Contract 06719-01 with New Flyer of America Incorporated to purchase 5 60-foot electric buses and 5 electric bus chargers for the Metro Gold Line Bus Rapid Transit Project in an amount not to exceed $10,844,000.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item, that motion is approved. Councilmember Barber. No, sorry. Those are all the action items. I'm sorry, my agenda here is folded on the wrong section. We've got, this brings us right to the information items. And the Transit Fare Elimination Pilot Program is one we've been hearing about. It is a subject of the legislature, and I really hats off to staff who have put together a program really quickly and for our consideration or for our information to hear more about it. So welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm Dennis Dworshak, Metro Transit Revenue Operations Senior Manager.
Jerry Sutton, Director of Contract Services.
Today, we're going to do a presentation on the Transit Fare Elimination Program. This is, let's see what.
You could pick up a few keys on your way.
Yeah, we switched sides here. Okay, here's today's objectives. We're going to talk about a little bit of the overview of the legislation. Some of our details that we've been working on over the past couple of weeks, where we review the Title VI analysis that's ongoing right now, the council policy, and some of the next steps that we're working on. The Transit Fare Elimination Program was included in the legislation that was recently passed to include 2 routes starting for 18 months, starting on July 1st. It also includes Metro free rides for certified Metro Mobility riders. We will submit a legislative report which will include an overview of the program and assessment of the effects on ridership, travel time, equity, rider experience. The report will also include any budgetary implications, lost fare revenue, any costs that are incurred, any potential cost savings, or any other considerations. One of the first staff considerations to determine was, are we going to go free fare or are we going to go reduced fare? The free fare advantages included, free fares are really the best incentive for our customers, obviously, and it was the original intent of the legislators. It's the easiest to implement by July 1st. It provides for faster boarding, obviously, and it provides for a simple and clear transfer policy. The challenge is it takes away one of our fare tools. We use fare payment as one of the tools for enforcing the code of conduct. Under reduced fares, the advantages allows for proof of payment as a tool for enforcing the fares. And it's still an advantage for our customers because it's a lower fare than what we currently have. The challenges are it's going to be very difficult to develop a reduced fare by July 1st. There's not going to be any or little improvement on boarding time for our customers, and it also complicates the transfers. So after analyzing the benefits and challenges of the free and reduced fare, Metro Transit staff and management overwhelmingly favored free fares for the 18-month pilot of the 2 routes. Some of the details of the free fare service: there'll be no transfers will be issued. If a customer boards another route from these free fares, they'll just pay the regular fare. Fare boxes will be hooded on these 2 free fare routes, so customers will know that there's no fares being paid, and there's be a sign up there explaining that this is a free fare route pilot. We'll rely on the automated passenger count, we call them the APCs, rather than the fare box data that we usually rely on. There's a free fare zone for Metro Mobility. It's a 3/4 mile corridor on either side of these free routes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also, like I mentioned, all Metro Mobility customers will ride free on all routes system-wide. The route selection. We took a lot of time to select our 2 routes. We looked at transit-dependent communities, communities of color, low-income neighborhoods. We wanted 1 East Metro route and 1 West Metro route. We avoided our existing BRT and LRT routes, but we strongly considered future BRT corridors. After analyzing these considerations, Route 62, serving Rice Street, Smith Avenue, and Route 32, serving Lowry Avenue, were the ones selected for the free fare pilot.
So as Dennis mentioned, Metro Mobility is impacted in 2 different ways by this pilot. First, we're pleased that Metro Mobility certified customers will be able to ride fixed route for free during this pilot. The second part of the pilot impacts fares charged on Metro Mobility. Per federal regulations, complimentary ADA fares cannot be more than 2 times the local fixed route fare. That means once the fixed routes for this pilot are confirmed, we will need to apply the free fare along the 3/4 mile corridor on each side of those fixed routes and apply that new fare to any rides on the Metro Mobility program that fall completely within the 1.5 mile wide geographic footprint of each route. We have some challenges around ensuring customers are charged correctly for fares in the zones along the selected fixed route pilot, but we are working with the software vendor to automate the fare calculation in the scheduling system. While we anticipate increased trip activity on Metro Mobility in the areas around the 2 fixed routes, we also expect a shift of some rides to fixed route from Metro Mobility. We did a small pilot of free fares on fixed route pre-COVID and found overall positive results. We found that some customers completely shifted from Metro Mobility to regular route, and we found some customers continued to ride Metro Mobility to the same level, but they also rode fixed route more, so they had more ability to travel. overall. Finally, we will be limited in our ability to track the shift of Metromobility customers to fixed route when the pilot starts. We'll begin the pilot with the flash pass approach, which means customers will either show their Metromobility ID or a state ID with an A identifier to prove eligibility. But we are working with Dennis's team to incorporate the free fare onto Metromobility customer go-to cards so that they can tap their go-to card and we can more accurately track Metromobility customer fixed route usage.
As I mentioned, Title VI, we are required to do a Title VI analysis. It's currently underway. It should be done by the end of the month, we are told. Fare changes longer than 6 months are considered permanent. That's why we're required to do a Title VI analysis. And then at the completion of this pilot, we will also have to do another Title VI analysis because it had been in place for 18 months. Under current policy, fare changes lasting more than 12 months are considered permanent and require a public hearing and approval by the council. It is recommended that the council consider this pilot exempt from the existing policy and these change requirements. Justification for this exemption is the change was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, and it's not a fare policy change system-wide. We're only applying this to 2 routes. The next steps, we will seek council approval for a same-week business item. That's going to be the Transportation Committee on the June 26th and the council here on the 28th. We're also seeking approval for the use of Route 32 and 62 for the free fare pilot. We will complete the Title VI analysis, as I mentioned. Customer and operator information training is currently being coordinated and planned right now. We've had several meetings on that already. We're programming Metromobility fare structure to include, as Terri mentioned, into their system. The instructions will be sent out to all Metromobility customers on fare payment. We're going to meet all the regional transit providers. We're going to be meeting with them next week and making sure that all the regional providers are aware of this program and coordinate with them. The implementation goal is July 1st, and we will continue the ongoing evaluation as required by the legislative report. At this time, we'll take any questions that you have on this project, on this pilot.
Well done, and boy, you've really acted quickly, and having this implemented by July 1st, last time I checked, that's like really soon. Any questions, Rita?
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and I'm really happy about the opportunity to be a part of this pilot. My question is regarding the Title VI analysis. Because you're doing it twice, I'm assuming that the first time is baseline statistics. And are those criteria what's mentioned on page 4, the ridership travel time, rider current quality of life, or what is the baseline that we're starting with in terms of those routes so that we can do an analysis of the success after the pilot is completed?
Take that one. Mr. Chair, Council, thank you for that question. Yeah, that's a very good question. Because this is going to be longer than 6 months, we are required to do a Title VI analysis, and that's just to determine if there's a disparate impact on the communities of these neighborhoods that we're going to be affecting. And we look at persons of color, we look at the low income, and just to see if there is an impact, what's the impact on these communities and these different people, and if there's any mitigating steps that need to be taken if there was an impact. And the question that you asked about why we have to do one before and one afterwards, it's because of the length of this pilot. The length of the pilot is 18 months, so that's considered a permanent fare change. So we would be doing another permanent fare change at the end of this pilot because we'll be changing what had been in effect for the last 18 months. If that makes sense.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Yes. I would think that we would have to start with a baseline of where the individuals are, besides just the fact that they're low income and a person of color. If you start out as a person of color, you're going to end as a person of color. So that baseline, we already know the results of that. The income, of course, that could change. And I would think that at some point after July 1st, because I doubt if you'd be able to gather all of the baseline statistics for those routes and throughout that route by July 1st. I guess I would encourage you to think about that. What are we measuring and how are we going to measure it? And then, Chair, I did have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, the other question is regarding the current revenue that we receive from fairs. I know that people on the council as well as externally would be interested in knowing what is the current impact of fair revenues, and would be wondering what would be the impact of providing free fares to our bottom line in terms of our budgeting.
Mr. Chair, Council, we certainly will be evaluating that throughout these 18 months, and that is one of the factors that was required by the legislation that we track throughout these 18 months, and we will be tracking the loss of fair revenue throughout.
Chair, I just
Your
wanted.
last question.
Just
kidding.
I just wanted to mention that I received a question over the weekend about fare evasion and the new policies that we have in place. You know, why don't we have turnstiles so that we can ensure that people pay and all of that? So I know there are questions, and there are going to be more questions regarding the revenue. So I'll be very interested in hearing about that.
Correct. Other questions? Chai?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't know if we're talking with other metro areas that have some sort of free system. Last November, some of us were at the Revolution Conference in Miami, and they run a couple of different bus routes, and one of them is actually a free one. I believe it was called the People Mover, and it actually rides on a monorail at some point. And so it was interesting writing that the People Mover, it was free, anyone could get on there. And so I think it would behoove us, if we don't already do this, is to reach out to other cities that already have some kind of a free transit system.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilman, yes, we have reached out to other transit agencies. We spent considerable time talking with Boston, who's done a pilot similar to this one, and they started out similarly with 2 free routes, and they expanded it now. I believe they're at 3 routes now, and they've continued it. So they have given us a lot of insight on some of the challenges that they've gone through and they're still going through, and then some of the benefits that they have with this project. So yeah, and some of the other ones, Kansas and some of the other cities that we've talked to and communicated with have gone through this pilot too. So we have got some information from these other transit agencies.
Thank you.
Tony?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the update. And to know that we are moving in this way in the pilot on no fare. I also wanted to know more about this, may not be the time, but more about the philosophy of fare as code or as conduct enforcement. If you want to say something brief about that now as we look toward the conclusion of the pilot and the expansion of the work, I know that all of us would be interested, me in particular because I haven't been in the discussion, but in just a ascertainment of what impacts we might see with free fare. But I also, I want to step back to the fact that I'm not sure I understand fare as conduct enforcement, and if you have something brief to say about that, I'd love to hear it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilman, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. We'll start off with, I'll go back to our discussion with Boston. Boston had the same concerns before they started. And then after about 1.5 to 2 years of their pilot, they found that slightly over 50% of their customers felt safer with free fare, and slightly less than 50% felt less safe with free fares. We use fare payment as code of conduct. Each person that boards the bus will come up to our operator. They will have an interaction. They will pay their correct fare, and if they don't pay their correct fare, then it's an opportunity for the operator to to take other action. So that's one of the ways that we use fare payment for code of conduct. And then at the end of the route, when we do we call it the terminal, the bus ends up at the terminal, the driver will clear the bus. And, we don't have people just living on the bus. They'll clear the bus, driver will take their break, use the restroom, come back in, and then open the doors again, and then they can collect the fares one more time. And it gives it an opportunity for the operator to collect the fares and screen the people coming on, just to make sure that people aren't just living on the bus.
Just a comment.
Go ahead.
It does, thank you for that explanation. Just observation is that the conduct that appears to be managed is actually the payment of the fare with fare payment.
That's correct.
As a conduct management procedure. And I was looking for more of an overall conduct, misbehavior or violence kind of behavior that we're managing. That's an observation that I'll hold on to as we think about the impact on conduct.
Mr. Chair, Councilman, there's one other that I failed to mention. It was we have fare payment zones at our stops, at a lot of our platforms, where you have to have a fare payment to get onto the platform. And so right there, that's one way of us monitoring our customers to make sure that everyone is going to be a valid customer onto the transit system, and that they have a fare payment, proof of payment available.
And again, the validity is based on fare payment.
Correct.
Okay,
That's
thank
correct,
you.
yes.
I'm just observing that as sort of a conundrum, Thank you.
Any other questions? Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the report and the work on this. And it's amazing that it's moving so quickly, and that's, the direction we've given from the legislature. And just 2 points. One is, I'm very interested in this idea that Metro Mobility users, when they start to use regular routes, have increased mobility. And you mentioned some smaller sort of sampling that we've had, and I don't know if you could maybe say just a little more about that, but as we go through this, I think the goal of increasing people's mobility is a great one, or maybe not the goal, the outcome through a pilot like this. I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, during the pilot that we did back in 2019, I believe, we had one customer in particular that used Metro Mobility extensively, average of 2 to 3 rides a day. When fixed route was free, he almost completely switched over to the fixed route service. I think for him, it allowed him greater flexibility, and the free fare was worth it for him. We had some customers that it just provided additional opportunities to go where they wanted to go without having to schedule in advance. So they continued to use Metro Mobility when they were able to schedule in advance, but it gave them that opportunity to go on a moment's notice.
Well, thanks. And Mr. Chair, and this kind of gets, I had some similar thinking to Councilmember Chambliss, I think. And, I know that the legislative report, the mandated legislative report of February 2025, asks for recommendations regarding any subsequent implementation of free or reduced fare transit service. And so I'm sort of just trying to glean what the legislative intent was here. And is that it, to sort of identifying areas where we may be able to provide free or reduced fares, expand that, and I would assume then there would be funding from the legislature as well to support that kind of operation. But is that the idea? Were legislators interested in us moving into an expanded free or reduced fare system?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, yeah, I think that is, they're hoping to see positive results and expand it.
All right, thank you, thanks.
Yeah, Councilmember Berber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councilmember, well, again, to the chair, I think that just in the conversations that were had at the legislature and even some of the ones we've heard in responses to some of our public comments on the TPP and TIP and various things, there is a push to look at free fares, but fares right now do make up a chunk of our needed revenue to operate. And so I think it's trying to go through and see what kind of impact it could really have. Going back to what Jerry was saying about some of the Metro Mobility work, out of the Metro Mobility Task Force, really doing this was something that was key, a big part of one of the recommendations coming out of there, and had some success, but I think having it for a longer term like this will be very beneficial.
Cool, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I just wanted to build off of those comments and ask to what extent the TAC has been involved in this process, either prior to this, or if you will go and present and have them engaged in the pilot program going forward.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, great question. We did present this to TAC. They meet regularly on the first Wednesday of the month, and so last week it was presented to TAC that we were moving forward with this, and it was met with a lot of positive feedback.
Great.
We'll learn more along the way. And to answer those questions, there was a conversation from a number of advocates who have advanced the idea of free fare systems. But I think that's a big debate within the legislature, so this is just kind of a way to put the toe in the water and see kind of how it works. Judy, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question too, the legislature, just reading the slide that you presented, that we could do free or reduced. So we chose to go free, and that was probably from the input that we've had, or we could have done reduced. So what made the determination to do free for both? Just curious.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yes, that was a debate, and we looked at that extensively on free or reduced fare. Free was just going to give us an opportunity to start on July 1st. The reduced fare is a very complicated fare structure because customers would have to pay a portion of their fare on these two routes and then pay the balance of their fare when they get to the next route. And customers are paying so many different types of fares, the programming of it would have taken a long period of time. Also, we don't get the benefit of driver time or dwell time increase or decreases because customers are still going to be paying something when they board. And if they're paying something, it still takes just almost the same amount of time. So we're not getting that benefit either, and we wanted to see that benefit. Those are two big considerations among a few others.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, if I could, so the time is actually them just having to take time to pay the fare? That's the time that we're quantifying here, or we're just looking at their overall commute by using free transportation and not via car? Is that, what are we comparing as far as time traveled? If I'm excited about it. I'm just trying to understand, what the legislature is looking for here.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yes, we'll be looking at both. We'll be looking at the overall time savings that the customers will have when they take that trip.
Rather than driving.
Rather than driving or
walking or biking.
Previously on that same route.
Okay.
There's a certain amount of time that it takes for customers to board and pay their fare. All of them boarding through the front door. Okay. That's all. That all takes extra time. And some of the other transit agencies have seen significant improvement. Some of them have seen a decrease in time just because of the crowding that they have and the extra time it takes for a large number of customers to get on. So they're not really saving anything. So that's what this is. We don't know what it's going to show for us, but it'll be interesting.
Okay, and then again, Mr. Chair, if I can just, on the entirety of each route selected, both during both peak and non-peak service. They weren't suggesting that we could do it during two different timeframes during the day. We're doing this will be entirely for the full day, right? But it has to include both peak and non-peak service hours. Would
Mr.
that be
Chair, yeah, Mr. Chair, Council Member, yeah, that's absolutely correct. It's going to be for the entire route for the entire day for the 18 months.
Okay, and I just, last but not least, I think it's interesting in a good way, the routes you've selected. And, speaking about the economic impact, from the management committee, it would be interesting too to see on this route, the loss of revenue that would be coming in. And then if it were to be expanded, I would hope that the legislature would make us whole in that.
Measure that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, so. Yeah, I mean, I think, and the only, I won't even go there, but never mind, I'll stop there. So it'll be interesting to see, what we learn from this, and kudos. I mean, I don't know if the legislature really understands how fast something like this has to come into play, and that really the reduced fare really probably wasn't a viable option, even if we thought we wanted to go that route, because we couldn't get it done in time. So appreciate how much you've been working to get it to us here today.
Deb, do you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick follow-up to that. Said one of the key things I think was picking these routes that are core local and supporting local routes, because some of them, when you talk to people who are out riding the system on these routes, it's the length of time that becomes sometimes a barrier to people using transit in that way. So even reductions in time of even small chunks of that'll pile up over the whole extent of the route could make a big difference to actual ridership.
Reason?
Thank you. So I believe that in the Transportation Committee, we talked about the use of the streetlight service. Is that correct, or how are we going to be tracking? I asked that question a little bit earlier, but is there going to be streetlight servicing in terms of the, what do we call that? Data collection, electronic, do we want to call it electronic data collection or surveillance information to identify usage on the route? And then secondly, and maybe tied to that, is do we know what the current, I know we know what the current numbers are in terms of rider usage on these two routes. So that would probably be part of the baseline analysis to see if that increases or decreases. But I'm just wondering, are we going to be using the streetlight surveillance service?
Mr. Chair, Council Member, yeah, we'll be using if I understand the question, for ridership counts, we'll be using our automatic personnel or people counters, APCs. They automatically count our customers as they board each time.
Yeah, so it isn't necessarily the streetlight program does a deep demographics and checks cell phones. I don't think that's part of this program. Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, just for clarification, streetlight does not capture any demographics or deep, it
Right.
just is the pinging of your cell phone and where you're traveling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we're not using it on this. Right, okay.
Thank you, Dennis and Jerry, and I really appreciate again how quickly and clearly we're really interested in how it goes and the results, but maybe as it's in place, we'll have some preliminary thinking about it, and maybe bus overcrowding. I mean, we'd like to hear.
Certainly. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
lovely.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have another presentation, and we have been talking about tracking areas of extreme heat, and I hope this isn't going to be timely, but it could be. It's a cool day today. Eric, it's always great to see you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Zelli. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. I'm afraid it looks like we are going to be experiencing some heat next week, based on the forecast. We'll have to see. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Eric Wychek. I am a planning and climate policy analyst within local planning assistance, working here at the Council and Community Development. I also serve as a sector representative for sectors 2, 9, and 10. It's a pleasure to be here and finally meet some of the new council members in an official capacity. Today's presentation is about the impact of extreme heat around the Twin Cities, and I'm excited to share with you the update to existing council tools. This is a general outline of what I'll be talking about for the next 20 minutes. First, I'll explain the Met Council's previous efforts to understand how extreme heat impacts our region and discuss the updates which have been made this year. Next, I'll talk about how extreme heat intersects with the Council's newly adopted 2050 regional vision statements and why acting on extreme heat is important to realize that vision. Following this, I'll preview the updated resources before giving a quick overview of outreach plans and ending by taking your questions. First, let's discuss the Council's previous efforts on extreme heat and how the work I'm talking about today fits into that. I'm sure many of you have seen various versions of slides like this. During the last long-range planning cycle, Thrive 2040 informed the initial work on extreme heat. It can be argued that extreme heat intersects all 5 of the outcomes identified in Thrive MSP 2040, but sustainability and livability really form the foundation of the past work on extreme heat. Thrive MSP defines sustainability as providing leadership, information, and technical assistance to support local government's consideration of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Thrive also detailed the value in protecting open spaces and vegetative cover, which mitigate the impact of urban heat island as part of the livability goals, and I'll be defining urban heat island effect later on in the presentation. Of course, we know that warming trends and increasing prevalence and severity of heat waves is one of the most obvious and immediate impacts of climate change, and an impact that state climatologists are confident will continue. We also know that strategic and proactive planning can help our region mitigate and adapt to the impacts of extreme heat. It was this connection between planning efforts and extreme heat which led to the Council's first efforts on extreme heat. More specifically, a regional climate vulnerability assessment, which was completed in 2017. Really my first big project here at the Council, which I started here in 2015, so this was straight out of the gate, I got going on this project. This report focused on both extreme heat as well as localized flooding risk. On extreme heat, 2 main products were created. First, temperatures were mapped during a historic heat wave which occurred in 2016 in July. Some of you might have remembered that one. The map was critical to build an understanding of the spatial nature of heat and the influences from land use and the built environment. Secondly, we also created a digital report, or what we call a story map, which explained the connection between heat and planning. We already touched a bit on the connection between heat and planning, but this past work articulated we touched a bit on the connection between heat and planning, but this past work articulated the active role that planners around the region can play to increase the heat resilience of communities. This report also touched on the importance of understanding human vulnerability to extreme heat and how this is essential to promoting a more equitable future. Now, the 2023 update, which we're excited to share, to the extreme heat tools, builds on that past work. The first major thing this update does is include voices from around the region which talk about the importance of acting on extreme heat and also share strategies with us. The second big component is updating and improving the map of land surface temperature. Including voices from around the region and stories in the update represents a pretty major shift and elevation of qualitative research so that technical assistance is more resonant for local governments. In April of this year, at our Earth Week Committee of the Whole, which many of you were present at, we heard from both the City of Fridley and the City of Bloomington that they would like to see more stories in our decision-making tools. We are responding to that stakeholder need with this project and others like it. These stories on extreme heat center climate justice and equity and are designed to be impactful for a broad array of audiences. The stories were produced as part of a Resilient Communities project this past semester. The Resilient Communities project connects local government agencies in Minnesota with the University of Minnesota faculty and students to advance community resilience and student learning through collaborative, course-based projects. The Met Council encourages communities to partner with RCP to build capacity to accelerate climate resilience work. The Met Council is also in a direct partnership with RCP on implementing climate initiatives within local comprehensive plans. This partnership alone has resulted in over a dozen community-specific projects since 2020. Both RCP and the Met Council work to ensure that all research and technical assistance through the partnership is applicable to other communities in the region. This specific project partnered with a capstone course for master's level students at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. We worked with three students, Maddie Anders, Alice Hewitt, and Katie McDonald, and went through a four-step process with them. First, we identified local experts whose work is connected in some way to extreme heat. Then we designed an approach to structure the project around the 2050 vision statements. Then interviews were conducted using a semi-structured process, and finally the main themes from the interviews were analyzed and further researched. Working with this group of students not only added capacity to the effort, but was also a mutually beneficial experience. So the second component of the 2023 update is improving the mapping tool. Advance. Both the original mapping tool and the updated mapping tool were created using remote sensing and satellite imagery. The new tool shows more recent data from 2022, whereas the original tool, like I said before, was from 2016. The new tool also has nearly 10 times greater spatial resolution to help bring temperature data into focus, and you can see just how much more detail is available in the updated temperature maps by looking at the picture on the right hand of this slide. You can really zoom in to your specific neighborhood and see what might be contributing to that heat difference. Both of these map layers are publicly available on the Minnesota Geospatial Commons, and while conducting this update, we found that the older data and the newer data really serve two different purposes. The original data from 2016 was able to capture a really historic heat wave across the region. In general, you do not get that lucky to get a map like this because satellites which collect this data only pass over our region about every 2 to 3 weeks. And you also need these dates to coincide with low cloud cover, smoke-free day, but also a high heat event. So this was a unique experience that we managed to get this 2016 data. The happy coincidence of the 2016 heat wave occurring at the same time satellites were recording information means that this data can still be useful, showing that extreme difference. The newer data offers a finer grained resolution to improve the utility of temperature data for planning purposes. The goal of the updated map is not to show the maximum temperature that any specific area can reach, but rather to show the heat differences across the region. Now that I've told you about the components of the update, let's talk a little bit more detail about the stories and the voices from around the region. These stories are structured around the 4 vision statements, like I said, that are informing the Metropolitan Council's forthcoming 2050 Regional Development Guide. The vision statements articulate what the Met Council wants to achieve for the region through our policies, practices, programs, and partnerships. I will describe the connection between each of our 4 vision statements and extreme heat through an independent story. First, I'll talk about the vision that our region is equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. For this story, we talked to the executive director of the Energy Sense Coalition, as well as a Met Council employee involved in a mutual aid group in response to neighborhood cooling needs. The key message of this story is that the impacts of extreme heat are not felt equally around the region. Low-income residents are more likely to live in areas with less tree cover and more impervious surfaces. This is in part due to past planning decisions and racist policies such as redlining, which intentionally excluded Black families from home ownership and denied all access to capital in predominantly Black neighborhoods. The impacts of these policies persist today and are deepened with disproportionate energy burdens. People living in historically redlined neighborhoods have higher heat exposure, and living in an area which is hotter means it can be harder and more costly to cool homes. While there are state, federal, and local programs which help provide energy assistance, Minnesota's programs are largely designed around providing heat during the winter rather than summer cooling, and such programs already struggle to meet high demand. Having access to cooling and affordable utility services in general is a basic human need and one that is not currently being met for many people in the region. Some community programs and informal mutual aid groups are helping fill the gaps in the need to access cooling. For instance, Rachel Workin, who works at Met Council, told us about a neighborhood-level community advocacy group which is helping provide people with air conditioning units. Public cooling spaces such as libraries, splash pads, local lakes, and parks with shade can also help offer relief from the heat. But this isn't a complete solution. We heard about challenges in getting transportation to these places and the fact that many options are only available during daytime hours and aren't providing relief when people are trying to rest, which can be incredibly challenging during hot nights. Because the impacts of heat are not currently felt equally around the region, achieving an equitable, inclusive, and welcoming region in the future means thinking about systemic solutions to relieving disproportionate heat exposure. The second vision statement is that our communities are healthy, safe, and vibrant, and we tell a story about the public health impacts of extreme heat. Indeed, our climate continues to warm and heat waves increase. The public health impacts of extreme heat have never been greater. Interestingly, there's a national level study that found that Minnesotans have the lowest risk perception of extreme heat across the country, which is dangerous because hot weather can be deadly. We talked to a professor and practicing physician who described how the health impacts of extreme heat are compounded by social determinants of health, which are the non-medical factors influencing health outcomes. If you've ever heard the phrase that your zip code impacts life expectancy, you already understand a little bit about these social determinants of health. In this story, we heard about how economic instability can increase risk from heat, as well as having limited control over the environment in which people live or work. Dr. Suraphaneni recounted an example of seeing a patient who lived without access to cooling present to the hospital with an asthma attack triggered by the heat, which was so severe it led to a heart attack. Despite treating the patient, this is really only a short-term solution rather than a systemic solution when the individual can't escape living in that hot environment. Outdoor workers also face disproportionate heat risk without adequate protections. Creating healthy, safe, and vibrant communities in our region for our region's residents to live, work, and play in can only be true if we're also thinking about helping communities build resilience to extreme heat. The third vision statement is that we lead on addressing climate change, and here we tell a story about connecting natural and built environments with the help of a landscape architect. Oops, I gotta go to the next slide here, sorry. Around the region, urban environments tend to be hotter than outlying areas, and this is evident, and this is the effect called the urban heat island effect. Urban heat islands are caused because cities typically have more buildings and impervious surfaces that absorb heat, and less vegetation and green space which can cool temperatures. Heat generated from human activities such as running cars and air conditioners can further drive up temperatures in the urban area. However, Mo Convery articulated that the way cities have been built has created this urban heat island effect, which also means that there are ways to build and plan to reduce heat impacts in urban areas. Incorporating natural elements into design can help create cooler microclimates. Thinking about tree spacing and shade structure, trying to reduce land area dedicated to parking lots and other impervious surfaces and incorporating green roofs and innovative stormwater management systems are all strategies to connect the natural and built environments with a positive impact on cooling urban spaces. As a quick example of how microclimates can exist in cities, I have a small map of St. Paul showing temperature on the right. I've started where the Met Council is. In the map, higher temperatures are in orange and yellow colors, and cooler temperatures are in green. The two prominent cool spots on the map correspond to Mears Park and Kellogg Mall Park, and show how even a small green area can impact overall temperatures. I kind of call this the bleed-out effect. It's interesting, in a lot of parts of our region, the parks actually affect the land around them, not just the park itself, and I think that that's quite a powerful data point. In summary, we need to help communities plan and design for the future, for these future hotter climates, in addition to figuring out ways to bring back nature into cities to slow the compounding impact of urban environments have on heat. The final regional vision is that we protect and restore natural systems, and we tell a story about strengthening connections between humans and nature. For this story, we talk to a health psychologist and an urban farmer. The first thing we heard was that nature is not equally accessible around the region. This is in part due to land use practices which have created areas of environmental justice concern where residents are overly burdened with living in more harmful environments due to redlining, toxic waste, or chemical plant siting, and less green space and vegetation. These areas often tend to have higher land surface temperatures, which compounds the adverse health impacts and leads to higher psychological and physiological stress. Despite these injustices, inequities, and adversity that frontline communities endure, they have been resilient in the face of climate change and extreme heat with little to no systemic support. Bringing visibility to this ongoing work is important. For instance, community gardens and urban greening help create cooler microclimates, build back urban biodiversity, and also create opportunities for building social cohesion. Restoring and protecting natural systems can mean protecting large contiguous swaths of green space, which are important regional heat sinks, but it also can mean looking for high currency interventions at a local scale, like community gardens or urban greening projects, which improve residents' wellness and resilience while prioritizing nature. Altogether, helping communities build resilience to extreme heat is intimately intertwined with protecting and restoring natural systems. These 4 stories about extreme heat are presented in the story map, which provides an immersive experience combining the stories with maps and data. Right now, these stories are under review and will be published shortly. The new map data, as discussed, is already published in the Geospatial Commons, but this will also be hosted on the Met Council website along with the story map. Before wrapping up and taking your questions, I'll quickly touch on future outreach programs. The work on stories from the RCP students was presented about 6 weeks ago to CD staff, and this afternoon's presentation really marks the first time we're presenting on the complete package of updated tools, including the new mapping tool. Over the summer, our colleagues in communications have developed a plan for newsletter stories and engagement on social media to ideally coincide with inevitable heat waves this summer. We would embrace your ideas for other ways the council might consider engaging with the public and our stakeholders on extreme heat. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric, I always love when you present, especially when it's on these topics related to planet Earth. Earlier today, CNN.com had a story that describes how the upper Midwest and New England are the hot spots for fires this summer. And actually, the western part of the United States, including California, are kind of coded green, that they're not going to have the same risk that they've had. I started reading the article, and it was primarily referring to Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and shortly before the end of the article, I kind of perked up and had to pay attention. They quoted, and I got to find him here now. They quoted an individual from Minnesota regarding the risk here in Minnesota. It was a staff person at the Department of Natural Resources who specializes in predicting the fires. And in his quote, he talked about the risk to housing, to businesses, to highways, to our infrastructure, and of course to nature, parks, all of our treasures. And as I read the article, I started to almost hyperventilate because I started thinking about, okay, so if we have fires, we're going to respond with water. And water is already a precious resource everywhere, but certainly here and certainly in the metro area. And so, Eric, I'm wondering if there is the possibility of combining this heat issue along with the fire risk issue as a Met Council for us to somehow work to have that be part of our public engagement and public awareness. I'm sure that DNR and other state entities, I hope, will address this, but I think that we're at a point where we can't take any risks. My sister and her husband live between Cumberland, Wisconsin and Hayward. And whenever I go to visit them, I go past a stretch where they had some pretty significant fires and tree loss. They've had it in the last several years. And in some areas, it's starting to get better and it's starting to get healthy. And who knows how long that will last. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that the combination of environmental factors that fit into all of this are pretty crucial, and that we as a council have an opportunity to help inform everyone so that we can be safeguarding our treasures.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento.
Eric, any thoughts?
Well, I did notice, thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Vento. I noticed, we've obviously, the air quality is very, very, very poor today. I think it's deemed hazardous right now. And these are the fires up in Canada, but we've also just had an outbreak of fires in the Boundary Waters, which some of you might be aware of, about a 30-acre area, and they're keeping a close eye on it. And I know that they're restricting, there's like burn restrictions and that sort of thing up north. I think it's a really important point that you raise, especially when we talk about the 2050 regional planning effort, thinking about fire risk, but also air quality associated with fire, kind of in combination with extreme heat. It's definitely something our stakeholders are probably going to be interested in and will probably bring to us in any case. So I'm glad you raised that here today. But I would be interested in discussing that more with council members. I know the climate group is going to be starting up again soon, so I think that that's something we can discuss as a group as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and Eric, just a quick technical question. I'm assuming drought and extreme heat are two different things. Mm-hmm. When they're together, that's trouble. Bad either way, but they are independent, kind of factors, right?
Yeah, as far as how the climatologists frame it, they do frame it separately, extreme heat and drought. That's kind of how they assess the long-term trend separately, so I think that's kind of how we should be really doing it too.
Right. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question, really, is taking this information and kind of rolling it out into the 2050 planning cycle. One of the things with the 2040 planning and the comprehensive plans was having the local planning handbook for communities that gave communities tools to be able to work some of these things into their plans. I think it made it easier for communities. Earlier, we did the effort on growing shade, where there's an interactive tool with that, which has to do with the tree canopy. And now we've got the heat maps. Like, are there ways to overlap some of that to eventually, when these communities are doing the comprehensive planning a few years down the road, that you can actually try things and see what the impacts would be of putting a park or building extra boulevard and somewhere to add trees or something? Just curious.
That's an excellent question, Councilmember Barber. I actually appreciate you bringing that up. I'm very excited about what I call the back end of the regional policy, which is the technical assistance to local governments. I do see a lot of opportunity here to really provide a much more tailored resource to local governments. I think a lot of our climate resources are kind of in separate places right now. So we've been talking internally with our research work unit about kind of creating a one-stop shop for climate planning. So local comprehensive planners can come in and actually look at the different tools and assess specific areas of their city and use those tools to create policies. The other thing that we've been discussing internally, and I'm sure some of you are aware of the legislation that just went through about requiring climate not only in the regional development guide, but also in local comprehensive plans. I think with that, we could look at actually providing data up front to local governments as part of the system statement process. That's been really helpful with, I can bring one example to you, is the solar. This last round, we were able to provide existing conditions, but also solar potential data to governments. And that completely changed and informed how they created policy in a way that wasn't there in the 2030 cycle. So I think communities really respond to information because it helps with actually creating policy that is needs-based and fit to their community. So that's kind of what I want to do on the climate side as well. Because every community is unique, and we need to recognize that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, that's great.
Judy?
I just want to thank Councilmember Barber for bringing that up because local officials, especially in planning, are experts in planning and all of that. Oftentimes, though, they have to bring in a consultant if it's in an area that is not, familiar to them. And I think this could help them a lot since we've got expertise around that right here. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing, and I'm excited to see it roll into some sort of a guide or toolkit or something for local communities. I think that will be very much embraced, again, especially since, the past several years, what we've been living through with the fires from Canada and other drought conditions and so on and so forth. And some of the stories that we're hearing in the news that are popping up about people not being able to survive the climate issues that we're facing. I would also say, when you bring up, it is very true, policymakers, and we are a body of policymakers, but I'll talk about it at the local level. If I had data and I had something with some fair amount of certainty, what we could see going forward, I was much more likely, of course, to your point, to say yes. I would say here at the Met Council, I crave that. So when you can demonstrate to us, anybody here at the council, when you bring things to us, that if we do this, there's a chance that this would be the outcome, or we will make sure that we track this and bring it back to you to see that this investment or this decision, here's the result, and did it meet our expectations? So I would just generally say that at the council, and really appreciate the work that you're putting into this.
Tony?
Thank you for the direction of the questions just now. It's exciting to think about this information as a part of system statements that go to local governments prior to their putting their plans together. And I would also want you to not forget that even those governments that do not necessarily do comprehensive plans, some of them, our schools in particular, control a lot of land. And I just bet this could be very informative to our school districts, as they look at their plans for development into the future. It would help me out a lot if they would get rid of some of those deserts. So let's give them this information too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Helpful. Wendy, then Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the higher definition map. You can really see where the commercial and industrial areas are. It really pops out, and it's probably a lot more useful than the previous map. I wanted to sort of broaden the focus on some of those areas that you were talking about in stories, because we talk a lot about redlining in the core and the effect on the built environment, but much of our region was built after the Fair Housing Act was enacted, and they have different dynamics. Like when I looked at the growing shade thing, when it was a previous council, some of you are new since then, but when I looked at that, at like Lakeville neighborhoods, it wasn't you know, the rich neighborhoods have shade and the poor neighborhoods don't. It was the old houses have shade because they have big trees, and the new neighborhoods, which are often the much more expensive neighborhoods, didn't have the shade. And I remember when I built my house in 1992, you know, we had little sticks for trees, and we didn't have a air conditioner because we couldn't afford it, and it was very uncomfortable. But I think we need to recognize that there are other stories in other parts of the region, and it's not just how things work in the core. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Eric, for this work and this report. And I look forward to tracking this to go forward. And I really am satisfied, I guess not encouraged, but that you brought up the air quality. And, you know, we were talking about heat resiliency, you know, climate resiliency. Now I think I need to add air quality resiliency to my vocabulary. And back in about 2013 or so, you know, I live in a core city community, work in a core city community, and all of a sudden there were all these resources coming into the community to do planning around climate resiliency, heat resiliency, and acknowledging that the impacts are disparate, right, on disparate communities. And just on my way over here today, I was driving, you know, maybe half a mile from a meeting right in the community where I work to the freeway, and it's just so evident that because of the city of Minneapolis sort of accelerated machinery to break up homeless encampments, now there are just people camping all along the streets, under the bridges. I probably passed about 40 or 50 tents in the half mile. Not really a camp, and I'm driving looking at this hazy skyline and hearing guidance that we should stay inside, you know, there I'm a vulnerable person to the air quality, and I have options. You know, I can move inside. I'm sitting in an air-conditioned vehicle. Here's people that have no options at all. They're in the air, and or maybe they have options, but they're living in the outdoors. And so I guess this is more of a comment. I really look forward to, as we continue this heat resiliency work, and to making sure that we're treating different populations differently. Populations that are at more risks, you know, are having some kind of attention. And so I appreciate your lifting that up. And the air quality piece, I agree. I think that needs to be part of our work going forward in climate resiliency or heat resiliency. And who'd have thought? Just a few years ago, I always thought, you know, here in the Minneapolis, our air quality is always good, and now we know that it's not. And so just to put that out there, that I'm really interested in sort of the disparate impacts conversation. And then I just feel like I have to note that on your slide that's about protecting and restoring natural resources, one of the quotes is from one of my employees, where I work during my day job, and she manages the food access in the Four Sisters Urban Farm. And so it's kind of cool to see overlap between my real life and the life here on the council. So thank you.
We like to think we're just another real life.
Right. This is a little bit, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we're doing some of the 2050 plans, and I know it's come up a lot with the transportation policy plan, there's a lot of talk about environmental justice and how we factor that and that language into our planning process. And often, I think, historically, you think about it as maybe pollution from diesel buses going through or this and that. I think as we look at this, or if we look at the air quality today, we look at the heat, do you look at the water, we have to really broaden that definition of what that means. And we have an opportunity to do that, which will help cities and communities plan in the future. But it's really something we have to consider as we're going through this process right now.
Thank you for that. Peter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to build off of these comments and remind the council that an hour ago we purchased 5 EV buses, right, for the Gold Line. And building off of the EV buses that we have and many more that we will be purchasing to do our part around air quality. I also, Councilmember Barber, wanted to build off your earlier comments about the growing shade. And one of the things I really like about it is the fact that you can layer in those demographic data with a neighborhood and compare it to the shade for a particular neighborhood. And I'm wondering about this particular tool, if there's any thoughts about doing the same sort of layering around extreme heat.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. That's a great question. Right now, it's just a kind of, it's more of a binary tool at the moment, I would say. Although it does have the ability to switch on and off the aerial so you can see what might be contributing to that heat. But that's certainly a conversation we're having with research. And right now, it's I guess, to be completely blunt, it's just a capacity issue. We just need some people to help on the data science side to actually do some of that functionality, to add that functionality to it. But it hasn't been lost on us that growing shade can do a lot. So I think, we would obviously want to build that into the extreme heat tool as well. So I appreciate you making that point.
Sorry, Gail.
I find this tool just really amazing. So coming from an environmental kind of impact perspective, so I could see this tool being used for construction and building. And are we making, if we're cutting down, lots of trees, what's the environmental impact to the neighborhood, to the neighbors, to the houses nearby, and whether that's going to be taken more into account going forward on larger projects, so I think that's really, really interesting because people don't consider that, well, it's across the street, it's really not going to affect me, it's going to be a building, but the temperature gradient goes pretty quick from hot, it slides over. So I may have a tree where I had a tree over here across the street. If that tree is gone, I'm going to be affected. And so I think that it's a very interesting tool that people are going to be interested in using really across the metro and really across the state to say this construction is really going to impact us from a heat and energy. Do we have the money to pay for things given the impact that it's going to have on heat? I just thinking that opens up another way of looking at impact for communities. So it's very interesting.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Cederberg. I think one thing I'd like to just add there is that I think that we've had instances of, I think, individuals using this tool on projects, the 2016 data on various projects, but we just had the first instance of a community using the 2016 data set to actually form policy around just what you're describing, like how does a city redevelop? What do they do with parking lots and lack of landscaping? And that's the city of Hopkins. So I'm pleased to see that the city just adopted a whole initiative based on that data set. So it's exciting. And I would like to obviously reach out to them, applaud them for their effort, but also reach out to them and see if they can provide some, a testament to how the data can be used.
Judy.
Just briefly, again, from my years in local government, Plymouth had a pretty strong and aggressive tree preservation policy. And then for anybody who's familiar with the Water Quality Act, whenever a wetland was disturbed, mitigation had to be 2-to-1, and it should be on site. And if it couldn't, then it could be mitigated somewhere in the wetlands. I can actually see communities really taking a good look at tree preservation and planting policies. Now, to Councilmember Wolf's point, we're sometimes in the suburbs and the trees are very little, but I will tell you 10 and 15 and 20 years later, you've got substantial trees. And I would say that, and not around this issue, but sometimes conservation easements can come into play too, to really give buffering between, or, a new development coming in. We did 1 or 2 of those in Plymouth, I believe, and had, stand of trees that were preserved. So anyhow, I think it's interesting, especially with that lens that I bring, that I think it'll be another tool in a way that they can think, local governments can think a lot more creatively, but with data pushing some of their decisions. So it's just a great discussion tonight. Thank you.
Well, Eric, once again, you've piqued our interest and informed us, and really great work. And I think with the growing shade, but also some of this comes at such a time when we're not only feeling the acute need, but we're in a position to do something. This planning process, putting it together, the regional guide, these are, I really appreciate this presentation today. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements regarding that. We've had in the past a number of work groups where we've gone deeper into subjects, most notably a housing work group and a climate work group. And we had a safety and security, which is kind of sunsetted. The others have too, but we're going to restart the bands and open up some work groups, particularly those who are relatively new, have an opportunity to join one. This is not an official committee. There's are not policy-making groups. They are not to vote to advance, but it is really generative conversations with staff, bouncing ideas off. It really does, in a way, help shape some of the policies and the programs that do come to formal committees and get acted on. So I really encourage everybody to think about joining one of three. We actually have the two housing work group, and you can kind of check with some of those who were out in the housing group before. Okay, raising your hand. So if you can kind of think, if you have any questions, you can talk to one of those members. Reva was chairing it. We may have all new chairs. We have a climate subgroup, but Peter chaired, but Sue is part of.
And transit policy.
Well, there's an ongoing transit study group, but these are the other, I'm talking about three. The third I'm talking about is actually a new one, which would be a regional development guide work group. So we got this regional guide. We're going to do a lot of it together as a council, but this is a smaller group that will spend more time kind of reacting to the guide. It's a really important one, and we can kind of decide the time frame or the commitment of each one. It's not this is not weekly, but it is. Meeting, I would say, monthly generally, and kind of spend a little bit of time having these conversations. The idea is to have the groups of 3, 4, 5 people, not bigger. So if you have an interest in being appointed to one of those, just let me know in the next week, by the 23rd, that's a week from now. And I'll email you just to remind you. But I just wanted to get this on your radar. Think about it. And if you have questions, you can kind of reach out too. With that, it's a hazy day, but it's cool. It's going to get hotter. Thank you for this really interesting meeting, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't ask the general counsel or the regional acting regional administrator, chief counsel.
Thank you. Yes, I missed the May 24th meeting. I did watch it back, and Judd was going through all of the thank yous for the legislative session. And if I would have been here, I would have mentioned it at the time, but Deputy General Counsel Dave Tyson is heavily involved during the legislative session and reads every piece of legislation that even remotely touches the council, provides very quick responses to our staff and helps them work through issues. So I wanted to make sure to bring that up and thank him publicly.
He's still recovering in the back.
Yeah. And the second point is the reason I missed the council meeting was I was at the tribal state relations training that is put on by the state that you, Chair, were instrumental in starting. It was at the Black Bear Casino Resort and hosted by the Fond du Lac Band of the Lake Superior, Chippewa. It was just a tremendous opportunity for me and 2 of the other lawyers on our staff and some other council personnel, and we're just all really appreciative of having the opportunity to attend that training. I think the perspectives that it gave will benefit us individually greatly. We've also had a chance to talk about it with our other staff members and truly looking at our Native American tribes as sovereign governments and really kind of stepping back from what we may have learned in school or in the past ourselves. So I just wanted to thank you for that opportunity. I think it's a great training for
Yeah,
those
thanks,
who
Ann,
can take it.
mentioning that, and I know a few others, a few council members, I know Sue, you have, and others have been part of that. It's really valuable, yeah. All right, Phil, anything?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
All right. This meeting is adjourned. Enjoy the